Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Steven here with TB Fork, and this is day 18 of the 80 Days to Your Dream Body course. Today's protein source is going to be beef liver, and today is a legs and abs training routine. And the theme for today's workout is CRAC PNF stretching. So right now, I'm going to be demonstrating how to perform CRAC PNF stretching. Now let's get started. And while we are resting, let's continue with our CRAC demonstration for the CRAC PNF stretching. And this time we are going to be focusing on the posteromedial fibers of the hip. So we're still going to be stretching the hip extensors, but for this time, we already went straight up and we already went out 30. We're now going to go out to 60 degrees of abduction. So with this one right over here, a couple of different options with regard to the positioning is once again, we could place it on the shoulder, come out to 60 degrees and then lift, lean. Once we feel a nice comfortable stretch, we would instruct the patient to inhale and contract into us, and then they would push down. And then on the exhale, they would actively go into hip flexion by driving their knee down toward the floor as much as they can. And what I like to do is just add a little bit of assistance and assist them guide down to the floor. But it's not going to be quite as much of assistance as you would be when you were doing something like contract relax. Then with regard to this positioning right over here, another hand position is you could go ahead and take one hand at the distal femur, one hand at the calcaneus, take it out 60 degrees, and then you are going to guide them into flexion at a 60-degree angle of abduction, and then instruct them. Inhale, push your foot into my hands. They would inhale and push, and then exhale, drive your knee down toward the floor, and they would actively go into hip flexion. And if you want, you could also just give them a little bit of assistance on the way down. With regard to this first stretch, what we are going to be working on, because we are focusing on the posteromedial fibers of the hip, we are primarily going to be targeting the adductor magnus. This time, we are going to be hitting the posteromedial fibers of the adductor magnus, and then we're also hitting the gluteus maximus. In this position, we're going to be targeting the medial fibers, also hitting the hamstrings. And the more that we get into abduction, the more we're going to start getting into the semimembranosus, because the semimembranosus is the most medial. So the more we get into abduction, the more semimembranosus activation we get. And then we're also going to be getting some semitendinosus, and to a much lesser extent, we're going to be hitting the long head of the biceps femoris, because the biceps femoris is the most lateral. So the more into abduction that we go, the less of the biceps femoris we're going to be hitting of the long head. And then we're also going to be getting a little bit of stretch in the adductor brevis and longus, as well as some in the gracilis. Next, what we want to do is we are going to go and take them into 90 degrees of abduction. So what we want to do from this position is just abduct the femur to 90 degrees. And what I like to do for this one is I will place the foot on my hip, and then there's a couple positions. One, I'm going to place my hand underneath the thigh. So it's going to be resting between the fibula and also on the femur. And then what I'm going to do for this one is I'm just going to guide it with my hip. So I'm going to take them up toward their head, and then I'm going to instruct them. I want you to inhale, kick your foot down into me. They're going to inhale and contract. And now exhale, I want you to bring your knee toward your shoulder. And they're actively going to go into abduction in the coronal plane. And if you want, I like to add a little bit of assistance. If you prefer, another thing from this position right over here is you could go over top. And instead of having them go up toward in the coronal plane, we could have them go into horizontal adduction. So we would just go same thing. So we would push down, and then once they feel a nice stretch, what we would do is I want you to contract. You're going to bring your knee up to the sky. So they would bring their knee and push up to the sky. And then on the exhale, I want you to bring your knee down toward the floor, and they would go. And then if you want, you could add a little bit of assistance and gently guide them down toward the floor. When we are focusing at 90 degrees, this is primarily going to be targeting the medial fibers. So we're going to be hitting a lot of the adductors. The primary muscles we're going to be stretching are going to be the adductor longus, brevis, the pectineus, and the gracilis. And then we're also going to be getting a little bit of stretch in the adductor magnus, specifically the medial fibers of the adductor magnus, as well as the gluteus maximus. And for this one, we're going to be getting the inferior medial fibers of the gluteus maximus. But our rest period is up. Time for set number 4. That was just a tiny taste of what can be found in my members only section. If you enjoyed it, become a member for only $5 a month to get access to hundreds of member only videos.